Okay, this is my first film journal that I'm going to be doing on our first weekend class, which was on Saturday. Um, I felt like the class was super interesting. Definitely is not a class that I would normally take, but I felt like it was necessary for me to kind of learn things that I wouldn't necessarily learn or be comfortable learning. Like it was like kind of put me out of like my comfort zone a little bit. Um, And surprisingly, I actually really enjoy the class. And so far, both days, I have, because I'm kind of doing this journaling on Saturday and Sunday, I actually came home and like ran to my boyfriend, was like, I learned so much. And like, this is what I learned. And I kind of like nonstop was explaining to him like about the films that we watched and like my reaction to them. Um, so on the first day, I kind of have some notes. We talked about like tips for active viewing, which I felt was super necessary for me just because as a film student, and when I watch films, it's always interesting kind of the thoughts that you might have going into a film and then, after the film, like kind of figuring out how to like analyze what you had just seen. And so I thought it was really interesting. There were like 4 bullet points, and that was narrative structure, aesthetics, perception, reception, and representation, and symbolism. So these are kind of different, like, these are all points on how to basically active view. And I just wanted to kind of explain and talk about the films that we watched because, like I said, if I got to choose which films I wanted to watch, I definitely wouldn't pick this type of genre or these styles of films. And so the first one we watched was Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which was actually quite interesting for me. Like I said, watching this film definitely kind of put me out of my comfort zone, which I feel like is necessary for me. And it was super interesting, just kind of like after kind of talking about it in class, the fact that, the people that like survived were, straight people, and the people that ended up getting killed were like queer people, which I thought was super interesting. And it's kind of funny to me. I feel like sometimes when I talk to people, and I go like, oh, if I'm like explaining a story and I go, oh, this person is queer and they're gonna die. Like if I were pitching a story to someone now, I feel like at least, the people I talk to would be like, what? Like, why would the queer person die? Like, are you against queer people, this and that? And it's like, no, I mean, like, obviously I'm not. And it's just interesting kind of seeing this film and then talking about it in class and realizing that like the people that survived were straight and the people that died were queer. I mean, that's just how they chose to do it, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And let's see. Oh, the question that we had to ask ourselves was, is it possible to watch a film that is both negative and positive? Um, let's see. And I feel like that, like, yeah, it is possible to watch a film that's both negative and positive. I can't think of a film off the top of my head that does do that, but I kind of briefly remember myself talking with my boyfriend about, after we had watched a film, just the kind of the messages that we had taken from it, and then like the theme, like main theme. And I can't remember which film it was, but I do remember us saying like there's some sort of negative aspects to it, and then there's also like, but it's also really beautiful. So I do think it is possible. And then I learned about camp. I still am a little confused by what that means, and I should probably, figure that out a little bit. But we learned about that, and then we watched Bound, which I actually liked because I love The Matrix, and so I love that type, like genre of film, which is kind of like intense and like mafia and this and that and money and like I thought it was really interesting, and I kind of like the relationship between the two girls who are obviously end up falling in love with each other. I thought it was a great story, and I like ended up coming home and like talking to my boyfriend about that film and saying, oh, we have to watch it, it's really good. Like, like the sex scenes are kind of, were there, but like wasn't as intense as like the Valley or Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. What is it called? yeah, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. So yeah. Okay, so while I'm here, I'm going to be talking about the second day, which was on Sunday. This day we talked a little bit about like queer and race. And so the first film, we also watched two films like on Saturday, but the first film that we watched was a documentary. And a performative documentary, and I really liked it because it was less of like, the typical sit down documentary where you're watching someone being interviewed and like it's pretty boring, but it was like very like, it was more of like an art piece than anything. It felt like a poem from like start to finish. I really liked how they kind of overlaid like specific songs and sounds over the images, and I also really liked how they did some close-ups of like the mouth as people were saying, these derogatory words. And like I said, this isn't, the type of film that I would probably watch if I got to choose, but I feel like seeing films like this kind of definitely, like, as a filmmaker, shows you just so many ideas, like so many types of brain fart, like shows you like different cultures. You get to see people's perspectives and things that people have gone through like, their eyes, and it felt very real. And I would never understand what it would be like to be in a position of like Black gay men, but I mean, I feel like this film definitely got you as close as you could possibly be to understanding what it would have been like, during those times to be a Black gay man. I thought it was super interesting how we talked about how the film got money, and they were basically raised money with people's taxes, and obviously people didn't like that because most people were probably like, oh, why are you using our tax money to create like a film about gay Black men? It's like, so I thought that was super interesting. We also, I can't remember the name of the film, but it was a stand-up comedy show by Michelle Cho. I believe that's her name. I have to double check, but I really liked it. I had never heard of her before, but I came home and like told my mom that we had watched these two films, and she was like, oh, I know who she is. Like, she's really great, this and that. And I told her that we watched the comedy show before she came out as queer. And I really liked it, honestly, because although it didn't necessarily talk about what, an Asian American, like, being queer is like, but it kind of showed how people, share their story through, like, comedy, and, like, stuff that might be kind of, like, deep for some people, but she definitely uses it, like, a coping mechanism as a way to, like, cope with it. She definitely, uses comedy to kind of help, and I felt like some people weren't comfortable with that, but I feel like, we need to kind of like open our eyes to the different ways that people may cope and kind of accept like, okay, I might not cope with my, my issues that I've had or my hardships like that, but if it works for you, that's great. And so I feel like, as someone who doesn't necessarily watch stand-up comedy, I found it pretty enjoyable. I mean, it's also hard because sometimes I feel like, with it only being one person, the jokes kind of get old, but she definitely, shared her story, and it was like start through finish kind of story. And I liked how she had lots of control over her audience, and she knew kind of when it was appropriate to get them to laugh, and when it, if something was a little like darker or more intense, then like, she definitely was able to control their audience, and that, okay, it's not an appropriate time to laugh. And so I thought that was pretty neat. We learned about a couple terms. We just talked about inhabiting / performing the object, and some other quotes and stuff. We learned what counter-identification is, and it's, and then the quote, was, I am not that disidentification. Preverse identification. Okay, I'm trying to like read my notes. I don't really know what I wrote. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. And like I said, in both days, I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 weeks. And hopefully with like picking or like making a little pitch for our camp photos, I'll be able to better understand, the term camp and what that means. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about our second Saturday. Basically, we talked a lot about design identification, and we talked about the readings that we had to do, either chapters 14 or 15, I believe they were. And when I was reading them, I read the second chapter. And it was about the Carmelita Tropicana, I believe. And the idea of disidentification when I was reading it was really confusing for me, and I really had no idea kind of what it meant. But then it really helped when we had watched Carmelita Tropicana and then watched Lil Nas X Montero video, I think it was. And then we talked a lot about, what was her name? Queen's, I forget her name. But it kind of like helped understand the whole idea of disidentification. And I honestly feel like if I had watched the videos beforehand, before doing the reading, it would have helped me understand it. But I feel like doing the reading first kind of allowed me to kind of figure out what the idea of disidentification meant before kind of being told this is what it means. And so without being like able to like know right off the bat, it kind of allows us to figure out or make our own idea of what it might mean, which I thought was pretty neat. We watched the Lil Nas X video, which I've never listened to his music, nor have I watched any of his music videos. And honestly, at first it was kind of like unique because it's not the type of music video that I would watch. But I actually listen to his music like every day now, and I watched that video. I showed my boyfriend that video because I was like, whoa, this is what, now that I know what disidentification means, this is what it is, and here's a perfect example. And this video is super campy, and here's the definition. And so I thought it was cool. Kind of once I figured out what terms meant, by the second weekend, I was able to like discuss it with people that I knew. And it was almost like I was teaching them these definitions and where we can see it and how to like better understand it. So. Okay, so the second Sunday, we watched a couple videos. It was our last day of the class, and so the big project was to work with our group in making camp photos. And so prior to doing that, we watched 2 films, and my favorite one that we watched was Terror Sisters by Alexis Langlois. And I remember watching a film that they directed during the Queer Film Festival, which like was super unique because I've never seen queer film in that sense. But I actually really liked Terror Sisters. I don't know, I don't know why. It was really good, and like the costume design and the sound and just like the message behind it, I thought it was neat. What else? I mean, during like one thing I really enjoyed was doing the camp photos, because once you kind of like understand what the idea of camp means, it's fun to kind of like do an example of that by working with other people in the class, which also helps you get to know them. But kind of making these photos really like kind of solidifies the idea of these terms in your mind, and then presenting it to the class was like, here's what this means, here's what camp means to us. And kind of seeing what people did, I thought was super neat. And I think that was a great way to like wrap it up, by the like Saturday, the second Saturday, terms and like ideas and definitions started sitting like in my mind and my understanding of them. So it was like more clear. And so by doing this project, it really allowed for like, okay, here's like, we're going to finalize all these understandings and everything that we've learned by doing a quick little like camp photo essay. And I thought that was really neat. So all in all, I thought it was great. And then to wrap up the course, I mean, I could make this video really long, but obviously I'm not going to do that. Going into this class was I definitely didn't have any expectations, but I also was kind of like, like, to be honest, I was like, was this like the right class for me? And I kind of had forgotten I chose this class until I saw it on my schedule and was like, oh, okay. But instead of like dropping it or being like, damn, like, I really don't want to be taking this, like, a class like this, I was like, whoa, I'm like actually excited to like learn a thing or two. And so I remember talking to my boyfriend and I was like, okay, like today's the first day. I guess we'll see what, you know. And I've also never done a weekend class before. So I've never sat that long learning about like, you know, similar topics, which sometimes can get super like boring for me, because I do need my breaks. But I actually like was engaged like 99.9% of the time. The first Saturday, I remember I came home and what did we watch? I can't remember what we watched. I think it was I can't remember what we watched, but I remember I came home to my boyfriend. I was like, well, I learned so much and it's only the first day. And it's not like the class wasn't weird, like the people aren't weird. I don't feel weird. Like it was super opening and like I really understood a bunch of terms and the people around me were super cool. And I was like looking forward to it. I was like, wow, I actually think I'm going to learn like a thing or two from this class. And then the second day, that Sunday, I was like, I went into it like, okay, I'm ready. I'm like ready to sit in class and I'm ready to learn. This is going to be fun. And then the second weekend, we watched a bunch of films and did some readings, and I really was able to finally understand, you know, okay, this is what these terms mean. This is what this identification means. This is what can't means. This is, you know, watching drag. Like I've never really watched drag, and so the Queen documentary was really, really cool. Yeah, I mean, and I feel like taking a class like this, especially for someone like myself who doesn't really like watch videos or doesn't watch a lot of like queer movies and stuff, it definitely like shows you a new side. It's like, oh, like there's also this. And I don't really think a lot of people understand that they're going to learn a thing or two unless they like put themselves in that situation. And so by me actually taking this class, I was like, whoa, like I actually learned things, and these films were actually really good, and like I would watch them again. And now I listen to Lil Nas X music. Like, so yeah, I think I'm definitely satisfied with what I learned in the class. And definitely wasn't a class that was like, okay, I got my credits, I can just check it off. It was like, wow, like I feel like I'm a little bit more intelligent in terms of these topics, and now I can discuss it with someone and not feel awkward or uncomfortable because I don't really know. So yeah, I definitely would recommend this class to people, especially like someone like me who isn't usually the one that's like watching those types of films or talking to I don't even really have very many like friends that are like really open about like, I don't know, being gay or this and that, like because they're all straight and they just like really don't talk about it. And then I brought it up, you know, if I were to bring it up to my friends and be like, oh, I'm taking a queer class, they're like, what, like what is that, you know. It was a very unique experience, and I'm really glad I took the class.